The wrench slipped from her oil-stained fingers, clattering against the concrete floor of Hangar 12. Staff Sergeant Rachel "Raven" Morrison bent to retrieve it, her coveralls bearing the scars of countless hours maintaining the A-10 Thunderbolts. At Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, the Arizona desert heat made the hangar feel like an oven, but she preferred the solitude it offered during the graveyard shift. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 29, Rachel had perfected the art of invisibility. Thick work. Gloves hid the calluses that told stories of different machinery. A baseball cap pulled low, concealed eyes that had seen horizons most mechanics never dreamed of. She spoke in measured tones, kept her head down, and let others take credit for the innovations that kept these warthogs flying. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell was pacing the flight line like a caged predator. His phone pressed to his ear as he barked orders into the darkness. The 75th Ranger Regiment had been requesting close air support for a mission in the Kandahar province, something about a high-value target pinned down in hostile territory. 3 A-10 pilots had already turned down the assignment. Too dangerous. Too complex. Too likely to end in disaster. Rachel paused in her work on the GAU-8 cannon, the massive 30mm gun that gave the A-10 its legendary bite. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but her ears tracked every word of Mitchell's increasingly frustrated conversation. She knew that voice, knew the weight it carried when describing impossible odds and desperate measures. "Sir, I understand. The Rangers are in a tight spot," Mitchell was saying, his voice carrying across the empty hangar. "But none of my pilots feel comfortable with the terrain mapping. The target zone is surrounded by mountains, limited visibility, and we're talking about danger-close support with friendlies scattered throughout the valley." Rachel's fingers tightened around her wrench. She'd flown missions like that before, back when her call sign meant something, back when her name appeared on flight rosters instead of maintenance schedules. The Kandahar valleys were treacherous, full of wind shears and enemy positions that could turn an A-10 into scrap metal in seconds. But they were also familiar territory, mapped in her memory like the streets of her hometown. The base operated on a different rhythm during night shifts. Skeleton crews, reduced security, conversations that happened in shadows. Rachel had learned to navigate this world, to hear the things that daylight meetings kept classified. For 18 months, she'd been rebuilding herself piece by piece, documenting irregularities that others dismissed as paperwork errors. Her notebook, hidden beneath loose floorboards in the maintenance office, contained a detailed record of her observations. Flight schedules that didn't match mission reports. Fuel consumption data that told stories of unauthorized routes. Maintenance records signed by pilots who couldn't tell a turbofan from a turbocharger. But tonight's conversation represented something different, an opportunity that might never come again. Mitchell ended his call with the kind of frustrated sigh that preceded difficult decisions. He walked toward the hangar, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Rachel kept working, her movements deliberate and unhurried, but she tracked his approach through peripheral vision. "Morrison," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of command and exhaustion. "How's the gun system on Thunderbolt 847? Rachel looked up from her work, meeting his eyes for exactly the appropriate amount of time. "Fully operational, sir. Completed the alignment check an hour ago. She's ready for whatever you need." Mitchell studied the aircraft, his gaze lingering on the battle-scarred fuselage. This particular A-10 had seen action in 3 different conflicts. Its titanium bathtub scarred but unbroken. The kind of aircraft that survived because someone who truly understood its capabilities had been at the controls. "Morrison, you've been working on these birds longer than most," Mitchell said, his tone shifting from command to curiosity. "In your opinion, could this aircraft handle a high-altitude approach through mountain terrain? Hypothetically speaking." The question hung in the air like cordite smoke. Rachel felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the physical response to being asked about flying when she was supposed to know only about fixing. She chose her words carefully, each one a small risk. "Sir, the A-10 was designed for low altitude operations, but she's more versatile than people give her credit for. The GAU-8 is accurate at altitude if the pilot knows how to compensate for wind drift. The targeting systems can handle mountain terrain if you understand the radar shadows." Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. Most mechanics could discuss technical specifications, but few understood tactical applications with such precision. "You sound like you've given this some thought." Rachel felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "I read the manuals, sir, all of them, including the classified tactical supplements." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had read those manuals, cover to cover, during her transition from pilot to mechanic. But she'd also written some of them, back when her expertise was valued rather than buried. Mitchell moved closer, his boots clicking against the concrete. In the fluorescent lighting, his face showed the strain of command, the weight of decisions that could save or cost lives. "Morrison, those Rangers have been holding a position for 6 hours. They've got wounded, limited ammunition, and enemy forces closing from 3 directions. 3 of my best pilots have looked at this mission and walked away." Rachel continued working, but her hands had begun to move differently. Instead of the methodical motions of maintenance, her fingers traced the patterns she would use in a combat approach. Checking angles, calculating distances, planning a route through terrain that existed only in her memory. "What kind of terrain are we talking about, sir?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Too specific, too invested. Mitchell's eyes sharpened. "Valley approach, surrounded by ridgelines, enemy positions on elevated ground. The Rangers are in a depression about 2 clicks from the primary target, but there are civilian structures scattered throughout the area. Requires precision flying and perfect timing." Rachel nodded, her mind automatically processing the tactical situation. Valley approaches were her specialty. The key was using the terrain to mask your approach, then coming over the ridgeline at exactly the right angle to deliver ordnance while avoiding friendly fire. It required instinctive understanding of how the A-10 handled in mountain air, knowledge that couldn't be taught from textbooks. "Sounds like whoever flies that mission needs to know the aircraft inside and out," she said carefully. "That's the problem," Mitchell replied, his frustration evident. "My pilots know how to fly, but they don't know how to make the A-10 do impossible things. They fly by the book, follow procedures. This mission requires someone who understands what this aircraft can really do." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She'd spent 18 months hearing variations of the same theme, that current. Pilots lacked the instinctive understanding that had made her generation legendary. They were technically proficient but creatively limited, capable of following flight plans, but unable to improvise when situations demanded innovation. Mitchell's phone buzzed. He glanced at the display, and his expression darkened. "Rangers report. Enemy forces have breached their outer perimeter. They're estimating 30 minutes before their position becomes untenable." Rachel felt something shift inside her chest, a familiar weight settling into place. Somewhere in Afghanistan, soldiers were counting down minutes they might not have, trusting that air support would arrive before their luck ran out. She knew that feeling, knew the desperate mathematics of combat, where seconds translated to lives. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what if someone was available? Someone who could fly that mission?" Mitchell turned to face her fully, his eyes searching her face in the harsh fluorescent light. "Morrison, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Rachel met his gaze, feeling 18 months of careful invisibility beginning to crack. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the people you need aren't the people you expect to find." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and impossible possibilities. Mitchell studied her face, looking for something he couldn't quite name. Rachel forced herself to breathe normally, to maintain the facade that had protected her for so long. Morrison, your personnel file says you've never flown anything more complex than a crop duster. Personnel files don't always tell the whole story, sir. Mitchell's phone buzzed again. This time, the message made him close his eyes for a moment, the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders. Rangers report casualties. They're requesting immediate extraction, but we can't get birds in there without suppressing those enemy positions first. Rachel felt her carefully constructed world beginning to fracture. 18 months of hiding, of accepting diminished expectations, of watching others fail where she knew she could succeed. But revelation carried risks that extended far beyond her own safety. There were people who had worked very hard to ensure that Staff Sergeant Rachel Morrison remained exactly where she was, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. How long would someone have to prepare for a mission like that? She asked. Someone would have maybe 20 minutes to review the tactical package, file a flight plan, and get airborne, Mitchell replied, his tone suggesting he was entertaining. Possibilities he shouldn't be considering. Rachel nodded, her mind already running through pre-flight procedures she hadn't used in over a year. 20 minutes was tight but manageable if you knew what you were doing, if you'd flown similar missions before, if you understood how to make an A-10 perform beyond its documented capabilities. Sir, hypothetically speaking, what would happen? To someone who volunteered for a mission they weren't officially qualified to fly? Mitchell's laugh contained no humor. Hypothetically, that someone would be looking at a court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and possible criminal charges. The Air Force doesn't take kindly to people exceeding their authority, especially when lives are at stake. But if that someone succeeded, success doesn't always matter when you break the rules to achieve it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rachel understood the mathematics of the situation. Risk versus reward. Personal consequences weighed against lives in the balance. She'd made similar calculations before, in different circumstances, with different stakes. The variables had changed, but the core equation remained the same. Mitchell's phone rang. He answered immediately, his voice tight with tension. Mitchell here. What's the situation? His face went pale as he listened to the response. How many wounded? I see. Understood. He ended the call and looked at Rachel with the expression of a man facing impossible choices. Rangers have taken multiple casualties. Enemy forces are within 100 meters of their position. We're out of time for conventional solutions. Rachel felt the last barriers of her carefully constructed identity beginning to dissolve. 18 months of hiding, of accepting limitations, of watching others fail where she knew she could make a difference. But some situations transcended personal safety, demanding action regardless of consequences. She walked to the aircraft, running her hand along the scarred fuselage of Thunderbolt 847. The metal was warm to the touch, carrying the memory of countless missions, countless moments when precision and courage had meant the difference between victory and disaster. Sir, she said, her voice carrying a new quality, something that hadn't been there moments before. I'd like to volunteer for the mission. Mitchell studied her face, looking for signs of uncertainty or bravado. Instead, he saw something that shouldn't have been there, the calm confidence of someone who had faced similar situations before. Morrison, do you understand what you're saying? I understand that Rangers are dying while we discuss regulations. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The mechanic's slouch straightened into a pilot's posture. The hesitant tone gave way to crisp military bearing. Even her facial expression changed, revealing qualities that had been carefully hidden beneath layers of deliberate mediocrity. Mitchell felt something click into place, a recognition he couldn't quite explain. Morrison, who exactly are you? Rachel looked at him for a long moment, weighing risks that extended far beyond the immediate mission. Then she reached into her coveralls and pulled out something she hadn't touched in 18 months. A pair of aviator sunglasses, their frames worn smooth by countless hours in cockpits that officially no longer existed. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying the weight of buried truths, "I'm the pilot you've been looking for." Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell stared at the aviator sunglasses in Rachel Morrison's calloused hands, his mind racing through possibilities that shouldn't exist. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of Hangar 12, those worn frames looked like artifacts from another era, carrying stories that personnel files never told. "Morrison," he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of dawning suspicion, "those aren't standard issues for maintenance personnel." Rachel turned the sunglasses over in her hands, her fingers tracing scratches that mapped years of combat missions. Each mark told a story: desert sand, mountain wind, the controlled chaos of close air support in hostile territory. She'd kept them hidden for 18 months, buried beneath layers of deliberate mediocrity, but tonight felt like the end of hiding. "No, sir, they're not," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of recognition she saw building in Mitchell's eyes. "They belong to someone I used to know." Mitchell moved closer, his boots echoing in the vast hangar. Something in her posture had changed completely, the way she held herself, the confidence in her movements. Even the angle of her shoulders spoke of training that went far beyond mechanical expertise. His phone buzzed with another update from the Rangers, but for the first time tonight, he ignored it. "Someone you used to know," he repeated, studying her face in the artificial light. "Morrison, I've been flying A-10s for 15 years. I know every pilot who's qualified on this aircraft, active or retired. Your name isn't on any roster I've seen." Rachel slipped the sunglasses on, and the transformation was startling. The hesitant mechanic disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who belonged in a cockpit. Her entire bearing shifted, confident, alert, deadly calm. It was like watching a master disguise fall away to reveal the truth beneath. "That's because I'm not on any roster, sir." "Not anymore." Mitchell felt his pulse quicken. There were rumors in the A-10 community, whispered stories about pilots who had disappeared from official records, but whose missions lived on in legend. Ghost pilots, they were sometimes called, aviators whose achievements had been classified so deeply that even their existence became questionable. "What's your real call sign?" The question came out sharper than he intended. Reaper. The name hit Mitchell like a physical blow. Every A-10 pilot knew that call sign, had heard the stories whispered in ready rooms and officer clubs. Reaper, the pilot who had single-handedly held off an entire Taliban regiment in the Korangal Valley. The aviator who had flown 17 consecutive hours of close air support during the siege of Firebase Charlie. The legend who had disappeared from all official records 3 years ago. "That's impossible," Mitchell whispered. "Reaper was killed in action, shot down over Helmand Province. I saw the casualty reports myself." Rachel's smile held no warmth. "You saw reports that said what someone wanted them to say. Truth is, Reaper was shot down, but she didn't die. She just learned that sometimes survival requires becoming invisible." Mitchell's mind reeled through implications that stretched far beyond a single hangar in Arizona. If Rachel Morrison was really Reaper, then the greatest A-10 pilot of her generation had been working as a mechanic 18 months, maintaining aircraft she could fly better than anyone currently on active duty. The waste of talent was staggering, but the questions it raised were even more disturbing. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why hide? Why disappear from something you were the best at?" Rachel removed the sunglasses and Mitchell caught a glimpse of pain that had been carefully buried beneath layers of acceptance. Because being the best at something doesn't protect you when powerful people decide you're inconvenient. Sometimes excellence becomes a liability, especially when it makes other people look inadequate. Her phone vibrated with a text message. She glanced at it quickly, and her expression hardened. The message was simple. "We know you're talking. Remember what happens to pilots who fly above their station." Mitchell noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" "Nothing that can't wait," Rachel lied smoothly. "Sir, those Rangers don't have time for my personal history. If you want someone who can fly that mission, I'm volunteer ready. If not, we need to find alternatives quickly." But Mitchell's attention had shifted to something else entirely. On Rachel's workbench, partially hidden beneath maintenance manuals, lay a collection of technical modifications that shouldn't exist. Custom targeting solutions, engine efficiency improvements, weapon system enhancements that went far beyond standard specifications. "Did you design these?" he asked, pointing to the technical drawings. "In my spare time," Rachel replied carefully. "Theoretical improvements to increase combat effectiveness." Mitchell studied the documents, his engineering background helping him understand the sophistication of the work. These weren't amateur modifications. They represented years of experience combined with innovative thinking that could revolutionize A-10 operations. The kind of insights that came from someone who understood both the aircraft's potential and its limitations. These modifications, some of them match upgrades I've heard rumors about. Classified programs that supposedly increased A-10 lethality by 30%. Programs that were discontinued after their lead engineer disappeared. Rachel felt the walls of her carefully constructed identity continuing to crumble. Mitchell was connecting dots that she'd hoped would remain separate, following threads that led to truths she wasn't ready to reveal. But the Rangers' situation left no room for extended deception. "Sir, we can discuss my background after we deal with the immediate crisis. Those soldiers need air support now, not in an hour after we've completed personal histories." Mitchell's phone rang. He answered immediately, his voice tight. "Mitchell here. What's your status?" His face went pale as he listened. "How many enemy fighters? I understand. Keep your heads down." He ended the call and looked at Rachel with desperate calculation. "Rangers report approximately 40 enemy combatants moving on their position. They've got maybe 15 minutes before they're overrun. My 3 qualified pilots have all declined the mission based on risk assessment." Rachel felt a familiar anger building in her chest, not at Mitchell, but at a system that prioritized bureaucratic safety over soldiers' lives. She'd seen this pattern before, watched as regulations and risk aversion paralyzed decision-making while good people died, waiting for help that never came. "Sir, with respect, your qualified pilots aren't willing to push the aircraft beyond standard parameters. This mission requires someone who knows what an A-10 can really do when limitations become suggestions." Mitchell studied her face, seeing something that made his decision easier. Whatever Rachel Morrison's real story was, whatever reasons had driven her into hiding, she possessed capabilities that could save lives tonight. The moral mathematics were stark. Bend regulations to save Rangers or follow procedures and watch them die. "If I authorize this," he said slowly, "if I let you fly this mission, what guarantees do I have that you can actually deliver?" Rachel walked to the aircraft, running her hand along the GAU-8 cannon housing. Her touch was different now, not the careful attention of a mechanic, but the familiar intimacy of a pilot reconnecting with her weapon. The A-10 suddenly looked different too, like a predator awakening from sleep. "Sir, I can't guarantee success. Combat doesn't work that way. But I can guarantee that if you let me fly this bird, I'll give those Rangers everything I've got. And what I've got is 3 years of modifications, 18 months of preparation, and a score to settle with people who think they can bury inconvenient truths." Mitchell felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. This wasn't just about a rescue mission anymore. It was about giving a warrior the chance to reclaim her purpose. He thought about the Rangers, counting down minutes they might not have, trusting that someone would come for them. "What do you need?" he asked. 20 minutes for pre-flight, the tactical package on those enemy positions, and clearance to exceed standard engagement parameters. "This isn't going to be a by-the-book mission, sir." Mitchell nodded, already reaching for his secure phone. "I'll get you the mission data. But Morrison, or whoever you really are, if this goes wrong, we're both looking at the end of our careers." Rachel was already moving toward the aircraft with the fluid efficiency of someone returning to her natural element. "Sir, careers are something you worry about when you have something left to lose. I've already lost everything that mattered. Now I just want to make sure those Rangers don't lose theirs." She began her pre-flight inspection with movements that belonged to muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. Her hands found switches and controls without hesitation, checking systems she hadn't touched in 18 months, but knew better than her own heartbeat. The A-10 responded to her touch like a familiar partner, systems coming online with mechanical precision. Mitchell watched the transformation with growing amazement. The uncertain mechanic had vanished completely, replaced by someone who moved with the deadly grace of an apex predator. Every gesture spoke of thousands of hours in similar cockpits, countless missions where precision meant the difference between life and death. "The tactical package is uploading to your displays," he called out. "Enemy positions marked in red, friendly forces in blue. Rangers are requesting danger close support. Some targets are within 50 meters of their position." Rachel nodded, without looking up from her pre-flight checklist. Danger close support was her specialty. It required the kind of precision that couldn't be taught from manuals, instinctive understanding of how ordnance behaved in mountain terrain, absolute trust in your ability to thread needles at 300 knots. "Sir, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice carrying new authority. "If I take this mission, if I climb into this cockpit, there's no going back to being invisible. People are going to ask questions I can't answer publicly. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Mitchell considered the implications. Authorizing an unqualified pilot to fly a combat mission would trigger investigations that could reach the highest levels of command. But the alternative was explaining to Ranger families why their sons and daughters died, while qualified pilots sat safely on the ground. "Let me worry about the aftermath," he replied. "You just worry about bringing those Rangers home." Rachel climbed into the cockpit, her movements fluid despite the 18-month gap. The familiar embrace of the pilot's seat felt like coming home after a long exile. Her hands found controls without conscious thought, systems responding to her touch like extensions of her own nervous system. The tactical display showed the situation in stark detail. Rangers pinned in a valley depression, surrounded by enemy. Positions on elevated terrain. Civilian structures scattered throughout the engagement area. Weather conditions are marginal. With mountain winds that would challenge even experienced pilots. It was exactly the kind of mission that had made her legendary, and exactly the kind of situation that had led to her disappearance. But tonight, the past felt less important than the present, and the present demanded action. "Tower, this is Thunderbolt 847 requesting immediate departure clearance," she said into her headset, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who belonged in command of lethal machinery. Mitchell stood at the hangar entrance, watching as the A-10's engine spooled up with mechanical precision. He still didn't fully understand who Rachel Morrison really was, but he was about to find out what she could do when necessity stripped away all pretense. 847, you are cleared for immediate departure. Bring them home, Reaper." The call sign slipped out before he could stop it. Rachel's response came back strong and clear. "Copy that, Tower. Reaper is airborne." 3 years earlier, Captain Sarah Reaper Williams had been untouchable. At 26, she held records that seasoned pilots spent entire careers trying to achieve. Most confirmed kills by an A-10 pilot in a single deployment. Highest accuracy rating for danger close support missions. 0 friendly fire incidents across 4 combat tours. The kind of statistics that made generals take notice and enemies change tactics. Her squadron operated out of Bagram Airfield. Where the Hindu Kush Mountains carved impossible shadows across valleys that had swallowed armies for millennia. It was terrain that ate pilots alive, wind shears that could flip an A-10 inverted without warning, elevation changes that turned routine approaches into death traps, enemy positions nested in caves that provided perfect ambush opportunities. Sarah thrived in that environment. Where other pilots saw obstacles, she saw opportunities. Mountain thermals became tactical advantages. Valley approaches became stealth corridors. The A-10's reputation for surviving punishment became her personal guarantee to ground forces that help would always arrive. Regardless of conditions, her call sign came from a mission in the Korangal Valley, where Taliban forces had surrounded a Marine outpost for 3 days. 7 pilots had attempted close air support, all forced to abort due to weather and terrain constraints. Sarah arrived during a sandstorm that reduced visibility to less than 50 meters, with enemy positions so close to friendly forces that standard engagement protocols were useless. For 6 hours, she circled that valley like a mechanical angel of death, using terrain masking and precision flying to deliver ordnance within 20 meters of Marine positions. By dawn, the siege was broken. 43 enemy combatants were confirmed dead, and not a single Marine had been lost to friendly fire. The Marines started calling her Reaper that day. Death that came from the sky. Inevitable and precise. What made Sarah legendary wasn't just her flying ability, but her innovations. She developed new approaches to danger-close support that became standard doctrine. Her modifications to targeting systems increased accuracy by 30%. Her tactical manuals revolutionized how A-10 operated in mountain terrain. At 26, she was already being groomed for command positions that usually went to pilots twice her age, but excellence had made her enemies as well as admirers. Colonel Robert Viper Hancock commanded the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing with the swagger of someone who'd built his reputation on other people's achievements. A career politician in uniform, Hancock had mastered the art of taking credit while deflecting responsibility. Sarah's success highlighted his own mediocrity, and mediocre men in powerful positions rarely tolerate such comparisons gracefully. The breaking point came during Operation Desert Falcon, a high-priority mission to eliminate a Taliban commander who'd been coordinating attacks on NATO supply convoys. Intelligence indicated the target would be meeting with foreign weapons dealers in a compound near the Pakistani border, a location so sensitive that the mission carried presidential-level authorization. Sarah received her briefing at 0300. Hours studying reconnaissance photos that showed a complex tactical situation. The target compound sat in a valley surrounded by civilian villages, with enemy positions scattered throughout the area. Standard approach vectors were compromised by surface-to-air missile sites, requiring creative solutions that pushed both pilot and aircraft beyond normal parameters. "This is a career-making mission, Williams," Hancock told her, his tone carrying implications beyond the immediate tactical situation. "Success here could put you on the fast track to squadron command. But failure..." He let the threat hang in the air like cordite smoke. Sarah understood the subtext. Hancock was offering her a choice: succeed brilliantly and earn promotion, or fail publicly and face consequences. What she didn't understand was that the choice was illusory, that failure had been built into the mission from the planning stage. The intelligence was wrong. Not accidentally wrong, but deliberately falsified to create an impossible situation. The target compound was actually a refugee camp housing displaced families. The weapons dealers were humanitarian workers, distributing medical supplies. The Taliban commander was a tribal elder, whose only crime was negotiating peace agreements that interfered with ongoing military operations. But Sarah didn't discover the deception until she was already airborne, flying through mountain passes toward coordinates that had been carefully chosen to create maximum political damage. Her tactical displays showed friendly forces where none existed, enemy positions that were actually civilian shelters, targets that had been selected not for military value but for propaganda potential. The trap revealed itself when Sarah reached the engagement zone and saw children playing in the courtyard of her primary target, families hanging laundry, medical workers unloading supplies from trucks bearing international aid symbols. Everything about the intelligence briefing had been fabricated, designed to turn America's most precise close air support pilot into an instrument of mass civilian casualties. Sarah aborted the mission immediately, her voice crackling over encrypted communications, negative on-target engagement, positive identification of non-combatants in the target area, requesting immediate mission clarification. Hancock's response came back cold and clear. "You have your orders, Captain. Execute the mission as briefed." "Sir, I'm looking at approximately 50 civilians, including children, in and around the target compound. This is not a valid military target. Captain Williams, you are ordered to engage designated targets immediately. Failure to comply will result in court-martial for disobeying direct orders in a combat zone." Sarah found herself facing an impossible choice: follow illegal orders that would result in massive civilian casualties, or refuse and face military prosecution that would end her career and possibly her freedom. But there was a third option, one that required sacrificing everything she'd worked for to protect innocent lives. She executed a perfect tactical deception, broadcasting false radio calls, indicating successful target engagement while actually delivering her ordnance into uninhabited mountainsides. Her official mission report described complete destruction of enemy positions and confirmed elimination of the target, when in reality she'd spent 2 hours circling the valley to provide the illusion of extended engagement. For 3 days, the deception was carried out. Military press releases described a successful precision strike that had eliminated a major Taliban commander. Hancock took credit for planning and executing a textbook close air support mission. Sarah received commendation for outstanding performance under dangerous conditions. But then the truth began to surface. Investigative journalists discovered that the Taliban commander was actually a peace negotiator. Human rights organizations documented that the targeted compound was providing medical care to refugees. International observers confirmed that no military action had occurred in the designated engagement zone. The scandal broke like a bomb in Washington. Congressional hearings demanded explanations. International allies questioned American targeting procedures. The military faced accusations of deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure, and someone had to take responsibility. Hancock's response was swift and vicious. Within hours of the story breaking, Sarah found herself confined to quarters pending investigation for war crimes. Her computer showed fabricated emails discussing payments from Taliban sources. Her bank account contained deposits she'd never made. Witnesses appeared claiming she'd expressed sympathies for enemy combatants. The frame-up was masterful in its completeness. Every piece of evidence supported a narrative of a pilot who'd been compromised by enemy agents who deliberately leaked intelligence and provided targeting data to hostile forces. Her record of exemplary service became evidence of deep-cover deception. Her innovations in close air support were reframed as methods for providing intelligence to enemy forces. The military justice system moved with brutal efficiency. Sarah's security clearance was revoked. Her access to aircraft was terminated. Her squadron command removed her from all duty assignments, pending the outcome of investigation proceedings that could result in life, imprisonment, or execution for treason. But the cruelest part of the frame-up was how it used her own integrity against her. The very civilian she'd protected by aborting the mission became unknowing weapons in her destruction. Her refusal to follow illegal orders was twisted into evidence of treasonous collaboration. Her moral courage became proof of criminal betrayal. Final blow came during a closed-door meeting in Hancock's office, where he laid out the terms of her destruction with bureaucratic precision. You have two options, Williams. Option 1. Face court-martial, spend the next 20 years in military prison, and watch your family deal with the shame of having a convicted traitor as a daughter. Option 2. Disappear quietly, accept a dishonorable discharge, and maybe someday rebuild some kind of life as a civilian. Sarah understood the mathematics of her situation. Fighting the charges would require resources she didn't have, against an opponent who controlled the evidence and the proceedings. Even if she somehow proved her innocence, the damage to her reputation would be permanent. Military careers didn't survive accusations of treason, regardless of eventual vindication. Why? She asked simply. Why destroy someone who served with honor? Hancock's smile contained all the warmth of the winter wind. Because, Captain, excellence is only valuable when it serves the right purposes. Your kind of excellence asked too many questions, noticed too many discrepancies, inspired too much loyalty among people who should be following orders instead of thinking for themselves. The military works best when everyone knows their place. Sarah signed the documents that ended her military career, her hand steady despite the magnitude of what she was losing. Rank, purpose, identity, future, all sacrificed to protect civilian lives that would never know her name. As she walked away from everything that had defined her, she carried only one certainty. Someday, somehow, she would find a way to expose the truth. But truth, she learned, was a luxury that required power to protect it. Without rank, without access, without official standing, she became just another veteran with stories no one wanted to hear. The system that had created her also knew how to unmake her, how to turn excellence into liability and heroism into evidence of betrayal. For 3 years, she'd carried the weight of buried truth, watching as Hancock built his reputation on missions she'd flown, achievements she'd earned, innovations she'd developed. Every medal on his chest, every promotion he received, every speech he gave about military excellence came at the cost of her erasure from history, not until tonight. Until Rangers needed saving and conventional wisdom wasn't enough. Until circumstances aligned to give her one chance at redemption, at proving that some truths were worth any price to reveal. As she flew through mountain passes, toward coordinates where soldiers counted down their last minutes, Sarah felt the familiar weight of purpose settling back into place. She was no longer Captain Sarah Williams, a decorated hero. She wasn't Rachel Morrison, invisible mechanic. Tonight, she was Reaper again, death delivered with precision, salvation wrapped in titanium and depleted uranium. The Rangers were waiting. The truth was waiting. And 3 years of buried anger were about to find their target. The mountain air cut through the A-10's canopy like frozen razors, but Sarah felt more alive than she had in 3 years. Below her, the Afghan landscape unfolded in familiar patterns, ridgelines that had tested her skills, valleys that had witnessed her victories, terrain that remembered when she was more than just a ghost haunting maintenance hangars. Her tactical display showed the Rangers' position as a pulsing blue dot, surrounded by an angry constellation of red markers. 40 enemy combatants in elevated positions, with more moving to encircle the trapped soldiers. The mathematics of the situation were brutal. 8 Rangers with limited ammunition facing overwhelming numbers in terrain that favored the attackers. Reaper. "This is Ranger 6, came the voice through her headset, tight with controlled desperation. "We have your aircraft on visual. Our position is compromised, multiple wounded, requesting immediate close air support." Sarah studied the tactical picture, her mind automatically calculating angles, distances, and probabilities. The enemy positions were well chosen, caves and fortified, Points that provided excellent cover while offering clear fields of fire into the valley where the Rangers were pinned. Taking them out would require precision that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits. Ranger 6, this is Reaper. I have eyes on your position. Be advised, some of these gun runs will be danger close. I need you to trust me and keep your heads down. Copy that, Reaper. We trust you. Those 4 words carried weight that civilian minds couldn't comprehend. In combat, trust meant everything. The absolute faith that someone would risk their own life to save yours, that precision and skill would overcome impossible odds, that help would arrive regardless of the cost. But as Sarah began her approach, her secure radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood freeze. Reaper, this is Overwatch. You are ordered to abort this mission immediately and return to base. The voice belonged to Colonel Hancock, monitoring the mission from the Tactical Operations Center at Bagram. Even across thousands of miles and 3 years of separation, his tone carried the same bureaucratic menace that had destroyed her career. Negative, Overwatch. Rangers are in immediate danger. Continuing. Mission as briefed. Reaper, you are flying under false identity without proper authorization. Your presence in this airspace violates multiple regulations. Return to base immediately or face arrest upon landing. Sarah felt familiar anger building in her chest. Even now, even with soldiers dying in the valley below, Hancock was more concerned with regulations than results. The same mindset that had led to her frame-up was now threatening to cost 8 Rangers their lives. Overwatch, those Rangers don't care about my authorization status. They care about staying alive. I'm continuing the mission. She switched to a different frequency, cutting off Hancock's response. Whatever consequences awaited her on the ground could be dealt with later. Right now, her focus had to be absolute, the kind of surgical precision that separated legends from casualties. The first gun run took her through a valley approach that would have challenged any pilot. But Sarah flew it like she was born for mountain warfare. Using terrain masking to hide her approach, she emerged from behind a ridgeline at the perfect angle to engage the primary enemy position. The GAU-8 cannon spoke with its distinctive growl, 30mm rounds finding their targets with devastating accuracy. Direct hit, Reaper. Came the excited voice from Ranger 6. That ridge position is neutralized. But Sarah was already banking for her next approach, studying the tactical display as enemy fighters repositioned to counter her attack. They were well trained, adapting quickly to her presence, but they hadn't faced someone who understood mountain warfare at the level she'd mastered. Her second approach used a technique she'd developed during her active duty, a spiral descent that kept the aircraft moving unpredictably while maintaining firing solutions on ground targets. Conventional tactics called for straight-line gun runs, but conventional tactics hadn't been designed for terrain this challenging. Reaper, be advised, you have multiple surface-to-air missiles painting you, warned a new voice on the tactical frequency. Suggest you break off and reassess. Sarah's response was to dive lower, using the valley walls to mask her heat signature while lining up on another enemy position. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford when Rangers were counting down minutes. They might not have. The third gun run eliminated 2 more enemy positions, but Sarah could see the tactical situation evolving rapidly. Enemy reinforcements were arriving, and her fuel gauge showed she had maybe 20 minutes of combat time remaining. Standard doctrine called for extended engagement, methodically eliminating targets while maintaining safe distances, but Sarah had never been constrained by standard doctrine. As she climbed for altitude, her mind was already formulating a plan that would either save the Rangers or get everyone killed. There would be no middle ground. Ranger 6, I need you to mark your exact position with smoke. I'm going to try something that's either brilliant or insane. Copy that, Reaper. Smoke is out. Sarah watched the yellow smoke rise from the valley floor, marking the Ranger's position. with precision she would need for what came next. Then she did something that violated every safety protocol in the A-10 manual. She pointed the aircraft straight down and dove at maximum speed toward the valley floor. G-forces pressed her into her seat as the A-10 screamed earthward, building speed that turned the aircraft into a guided missile. At the last possible moment, she pulled out of the dive and began the most dangerous gun run of her career, a low-altitude strafing pass that would take her directly over the Rangers' position while engaging every enemy fighter in the valley. Maneuver was called running the gauntlet, and it had been banned by Air Force regulations after 3 pilots died attempting it. But Sarah had perfected the technique during her active duty, using the A-10's durability and her own precision to deliver devastating firepower at point-blank range. For 30 seconds, her aircraft became the center of a storm of gunfire, tracer rounds lighting up the valley like deadly fireworks. But Sarah held her course, her cannon finding target after target with mechanical precision. Enemy positions that had seemed impregnable moments before were reduced to smoking craters. Jesus Christ, Reaper! Ranger 6's voice was filled with awe and disbelief. I count 12 enemy positions neutralized. The remaining hostiles are breaking contact and withdrawing. Sarah pulled up from her strafing run, checking her aircraft for damage. The A-10 had taken multiple hits, but its legendary toughness had kept her airborne. Hydraulic systems were compromised, and she'd lost some control responsiveness, but the aircraft was still flyable. Ranger 6, this is Reaper. Your extraction helicopter is inbound, ETA 15 minutes. Can you hold your position? Affirmative. Reaper, thanks to you, we can hold until extraction arrives. You just saved 8 lives tonight. But Sarah's radio crackled with another transmission, this one on the emergency frequency that every military aircraft monitored. All aircraft, be advised that Reaper is flying under stolen identity. The pilot of that aircraft is wanted for questioning regarding war crimes. Any assistance provided to that aircraft will result in criminal charges. Hancock's voice carried across the airwaves, turning Sarah's moment of triumph into the beginning of a manhunt. Other aircraft in the area would now be obligated to report her position, potentially forcing her down before she could return to base. That's when an unexpected voice joined the frequency. Overwatch. This is Viper 2-1. I'm not seeing any stolen aircraft out here. I'm seeing an American pilot who just saved 8 Rangers from certain death. Maybe we should focus on that instead of ancient history. The speaker was Captain Marcus Thunder Rodriguez, an F-16 pilot whose squadron operated out of the same base. Sarah didn't know him personally, but his intervention was creating space for other pilots to make their own choices about what they'd witnessed. Viper 2-1, you are ordered to vector toward Reaper's position and force that aircraft to land immediately. Hancock's voice carried bureaucratic fury. Negative, Overwatch. My fuel state requires immediate return to base. Besides, if Reaper just saved 8 Rangers, sounds like someone I'd rather buy a drink than arrest. More voices joined the frequency as other pilots weighed in. This is Eagle 4. I didn't see any unauthorized aircraft either. Just heard some Rangers got pulled out of an impossible situation. Phoenix 7 here, confirming negative contact on any stolen aircraft. Whoever flew that mission just accomplished something I'm not sure I could have pulled off. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Other military pilots standing with her, refusing to participate in the bureaucratic assassination of someone who just risked everything to save soldiers' lives. The professional solidarity she'd lost when she was framed was returning, pilot by pilot, voice by voice. But the most important transmission came from an unexpected source. All stations. This is Ranger 6, the pilot of that A-10 just saved my men from certain death. I don't care what paperwork says, that pilot is a hero, and any attempt to prosecute someone who risked their life for soldiers is something my Rangers and I will remember. The tactical frequency fell silent as the implications sank in. Rangers were legendary for their loyalty, and Ranger 6 had just made it clear that anyone who went after Sarah would be making enemies of some of the most elite soldiers in the American military. Sarah's fuel gauge showed critical levels, forcing her to begin the journey back to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. But as she flew through mountain passes that had witnessed her resurrection, she realized something fundamental had changed. She was no longer alone, no longer the isolated victim of Hancock's frame-up. Other pilots believed in her. Rangers owed their lives to her skills. The network of support that had been systematically destroyed 3 years ago was rebuilding itself, person by person, mission by mission. "Reaper, this is Thunder," came Rodriguez's voice on a secure channel. "I don't know your whole story, but I know what I just witnessed. When you land, there are going to be some difficult conversations, but you won't be facing them alone." Sarah felt tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in 3 years. For so long, she'd carried the weight of buried truth in isolation, convinced that excellence and integrity were liabilities in a system that valued compliance over competence. But tonight had proven that there were still people willing to stand for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. "Thunder, this is Reaper. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet. The real battle starts when we land. But I think it's time some people learned what happens when you try to bury someone who refuses to stay dead." The emergency landing at Davis-Monthan felt like flying into a hornet's nest. Sarah could see military police vehicles positioned around the runway, their lights creating an ominous constellation of red and blue against the desert darkness. Her damaged A-10 shuddered as she brought it down, hydraulic systems failing progressively, but holding together long enough to deliver her safely to Earth. As the engines wound down, Sarah sat in the cockpit for a moment that felt suspended between past and future. Through her canopy, she could see Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell approaching with a mixture of determination and concern. Behind him, Captain Rodriguez jogged across the tarmac, still wearing his flight gear from his own recent mission. But the figure that dominated the scene was Colonel Hancock himself, having flown in from Bagram specifically to handle what he clearly viewed as a personal crisis. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the bureaucratic fury radiating from his posture as he directed military police into position. "Reaper, this is Tower," came Mitchell's voice through her headset. "Shut down your engines and exit the aircraft. Slowly. We've got some complications down here, but you're not alone." Sarah began her post-flight procedures with mechanical precision, but her mind was racing through implications that extended far beyond her immediate situation. The successful Ranger rescue had created a narrative problem for Hancock. How do you prosecute someone for heroism without looking like the villain yourself? The answer, she realized, was to control the story before it could spread beyond military channels. Frame the rescue as reckless endangerment, emphasize the regulatory violations, turn her greatest triumph back into evidence of her unfitness. For command. As Sarah climbed down from the cockpit, she was immediately surrounded by military police, their weapons drawn but not quite pointed at her. The lead PEMP, a sergeant whose nameplate read Jackson, looked distinctly uncomfortable with the situation. "Ma'am," Jackson said, his voice carrying reluctant authority, "I'm instructed to place you under arrest pending investigation of unauthorized aircraft operation and violation of restricted airspace." But before the handcuffs could be produced, Captain Rodriguez stepped forward with a folder full of documents. "Sergeant, before you do anything irreversible, you might want to review these mission authorization papers." Hancock's voice cut across the tarmac like a blade. "Captain Rodriguez, those documents have no bearing on this situation. The individual you're attempting to protect has been operating under false identity for 18 months. Sarah felt the familiar weight of Hancock's attention, the same bureaucratic menace that had destroyed her career 3 years ago. But something was different this time. She wasn't facing the accusation alone. And she wasn't the same person who had been systematically isolated and destroyed. "Colonel Hancock," she said, her voice carrying across the tarmac with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Those Rangers are alive because someone was willing to bend your precious regulations. Are you really prepared to prosecute?" "Success?" Hancock's smile contained all the warmth of winter wind. "Captain Williams, or should I say Morrison, your unauthorized actions tonight have compromised operational security and violated numerous military regulations. The fact that you achieved a tactical success doesn't excuse criminal behavior." But Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell stepped forward with his own set of documents. "Colonel, I have here signed authorization for emergency close air support, issued under my authority as base commander." The pilot was operating under legitimate orders to assist military personnel in distress. The bureaucratic chess match was beginning, each side producing paperwork designed to establish legal precedent. But Sarah realized that Hancock had prepared for this confrontation more thoroughly than her allies understood. "Colonel Mitchell," Hancock said, his tone shifting to bureaucratic precision, "your authorization is meaningless when issued to someone operating under false identity. The individual you authorize doesn't legally exist. Rachel Morrison has no military record, no flight certification, no legal standing to operate military aircraft." The trap revealed its full dimensions as Hancock continued. "Furthermore, security. Investigations over the past 6 months have revealed that Rachel Morrison appears to be a deep cover identity, created by foreign intelligence services. We have evidence suggesting this individual has been gathering classified information about A-10 operations for purposes of espionage." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as Hancock produced a file thick with fabricated evidence. Photos of her in conversation with individuals identified as suspected foreign agents, actually base personnel she'd worked with daily. Financial records showing payments from offshore accounts, deposits she'd never seen before. Technical documents allegedly found in her quarters, specifications she'd developed, but never shared. The frame-up was masterful in its completeness, transforming her 18 months of patient documentation into evidence of espionage. Every innovation she'd developed, every improvement she'd suggested, every moment of excellence became proof of treasonous collaboration with enemy forces. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hancock announced to the growing crowd of military personnel, "what we're dealing with here isn't just unauthorized aircraft operation. We're looking at a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to compromise American close air support capabilities." Sarah watched as doubt began to creep into the faces around her. Even Rodriguez looked shaken by the weight of accusations being leveled. The same excellence that had made her legendary was being weaponized against her once again, twisted into evidence of betrayal rather than patriotism. But then Sergeant Jackson, the MP who had been prepared to arrest her, did something unexpected. He lowered his weapon and looked directly at Hancock with barely concealed disgust. "Sir," Jackson said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "with all due respect, I just finished talking to Ranger 6 over radio. Those soldiers are calling this pilot a hero who saved their lives under impossible conditions. Are you really suggesting that someone who just risked everything to save American soldiers is a foreign spy?" Hancock's response was swift and vicious. "Sergeant, you're not qualified to assess intelligence matters. That's precisely the kind of emotional thinking that allows enemy agents to operate undetected." But Jackson wasn't backing down. "Colonel, I've served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I know what Rangers sound like when they're grateful to be alive. And I know what bureaucrats sound like when they're more concerned with covering their asses than supporting soldiers." The confrontation was spiraling beyond Hancock's control as other military personnel began to choose sides. The base's aircraft mechanics who had worked alongside Rachel for 18 months stepped forward to vouch for her character. Pilots who had heard the radio transmissions during the rescue mission. Why someone would risk court-martial to save Rangers if they were actually a foreign agent. Sarah realized that Hancock had made a critical error he'd underestimated. How deeply she'd integrated into the base community during her time as Rachel Morrison. The invisibility that had protected her from scrutiny had also allowed her to build genuine relationships with people who knew her character firsthand. "Colonel Hancock," she said, her voice carrying across the increasingly tense crowd, "you seem to have forgotten something important. If I'm really a foreign spy who's been gathering intelligence for 18 months, why did I just risk exposing myself to save American soldiers? What possible espionage value would that serve?" The question hung in the air like cordite smoke, highlighting the logical inconsistency in Hancock's accusations. A deep-cover spy wouldn't blow their identity for a rescue mission that provided no intelligence value. The heroic action that had saved the Rangers was incompatible with the espionage charges being leveled. Another voice responded, electronically distorted but clearly from someone with significant authority. "Understood. Clean slate protocol is authorized. Make sure the trail leads to foreign espionage rather than internal corruption. We can't afford to have this traced back to weapons-dealing operations." Rodriguez felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. The frame-up wasn't just about destroying Sarah's career. It was about protecting a network of corruption that extended far beyond one colonel's ambitions. "Lisa, we need to get this information to someone who can act on it. But if we go through normal channels—" "Hancock controls normal channels," Chun finished. "But there might be another way." While Rodriguez and Chun worked to expose the digital evidence, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell was pursuing a different strategy. The Rangers who'd been saved by Sarah's mission weren't subject to base authority. They reported through Special Operations Command, which operated with significant autonomy from regular military bureaucracy. Mitchell had managed to reach Ranger 6 directly, and what he learned changed his understanding of the entire situation. "Sir," the Ranger captain explained over a secure satellite phone, "that pilot didn't just save our lives tonight. She flew a mission that 3 other pilots refused, through terrain that should have been impossible, with precision that I've never seen before. And she did it while taking fire from positions that had us pinned down for hours. Captain, I need you to understand something. The pilot who saved your team is being charged with espionage. Colonel Hancock claims she's been operating under false identity as part of a foreign intelligence operation." The laugh that came back through the satellite connection contained no humor whatsoever. "Sir, with all due respect to Colonel Hancock, that's the biggest load of bureaucratic bullshit I've ever heard. Foreign spies don't risk their covers to save American soldiers with flying skills that belong in the Hall of Fame." But Mitchell needed more than testimonials. He needed evidence that could stand up to Broken Arrow protocol. That's when he remembered something Sarah had mentioned during their conversation in the hangar. She'd kept detailed records of everything she'd observed during her 18 months as Rachel Morrison. The maintenance office had been sealed as part of the espionage investigation, but Mitchell's authority as base commander gave him access that others lacked. What he found hidden beneath loose floorboards was enough to turn the entire situation upside down. Sarah's notebook contained 18 months of meticulous documentation, flight schedules that didn't match official records, maintenance reports signed by pilots who'd never touched the aircraft they were supposedly responsible for, fuel consumption data that revealed unauthorized flights to destinations that weren't on any approved flight plan. But the most explosive discovery was a series of photographs and audio recordings that Sarah had secretly gathered, showing Colonel Hancock meeting with individuals who definitely weren't authorized to be on military property. Mitchell spread the materials across his office desk, feeling his understanding of base operations shifting with each piece of evidence. Sarah hadn't just been hiding her identity for 18 months. She'd been conducting a solo investigation into corruption that reached far beyond what anyone had imagined. His secure phone rang. Mitchell here. Sir, this is Rodriguez. You need to get to the communications center immediately. We've got evidence that's going to blow this whole thing wide open. 15 minutes later, Mitchell stood in the communications center staring at screens full of data that painted a picture of systematic corruption, extending far beyond Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Rodriguez and Chun had assembled a digital mosaic of fraud, weapons dealing, and bureaucratic assassination that read like the plot of a conspiracy thriller. Sir, Rodriguez explained, we've got communication logs showing that Colonel Hancock has been selling military weapons to private contractors, using base aircraft for unauthorized transport missions, and systematically eliminating personnel who might expose the operation. The Sarah Williams frame-up 3 years ago wasn't about a single mission, Chun added. It was about silencing someone who'd figured out that her commanding officer was using military resources for personal profit. Mitchell studied the evidence with the growing realization that they were dealing with something much larger than he'd initially understood. How far does this go? Pentagon level, at least, Rodriguez replied. Maybe higher. We're talking about a network of officials who've been using military operations as cover for private business interests. But even as they assembled the evidence, time was working against them. Hancock had activated procedures that would allow him to transfer Sarah to a black site facility within hours, where she could be held indefinitely without access to legal representation or outside communication. We've got maybe 6 hours before she disappears permanently, Mitchell realized. What's our play? The answer came from an unexpected source. Chun's communication system suddenly came alive with incoming transmissions from sources that shouldn't have existed, rangers from the unit that Sarah had saved, pilots from other bases who'd heard radio transmissions from the rescue mission, mechanics and support personnel who'd worked with Sarah during her months as Rachel Morrison. Sir, Chun said, staring at her monitors in amazement, we're getting messages from military personnel across 3 different time zones. Word about tonight's mission has spread through unofficial channels, and people are starting to ask questions about why someone who just saved American lives is being charged with espionage. The story was spreading beyond Hancock's ability to control it, carried by the same military networks that had initially been used to isolate and destroy Sarah. Social media posts from family members, phone calls between veterans, text messages from active duty personnel who'd witnessed the radio transmissions. The narrative was escaping containment. Mitchell made a decision that would either save Sarah's life or destroy his own career. Rodriguez, Chun, I need you to prepare a comprehensive evidence package, everything we've discovered about Hancock's operations, all the digital proof of evidence fabrication, complete documentation of the corruption network. Sir, what are you planning? I'm going to hold a press conference. Full disclosure, complete transparency. Let the American people decide whether they want their military resources used for private profit while heroes get framed for treason. But before Mitchell could implement his plan, his office door burst open without warning. Colonel Hancock entered accompanied by military police and individuals in civilian clothes who had the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. Colonel Mitchell, Hancock said, his voice carrying bureaucratic triumph, you're relieved of command pending investigation of your role in tonight's security breach. These agents will be conducting interviews to determine whether you've been compromised by the same foreign intelligence operation. Mitchell felt the trap expanding to encompass anyone who'd supported Sarah, but he'd prepared for this possibility. Colonel Hancock, before you do anything irreversible, you might want to know that everything we've discovered about your operations has already been transmitted to congressional oversight committees, Department of Defense investigators, and military justice officials who operate outside your chain of command. The lie was perfectly delivered, carrying enough plausibility to create doubt in Hancock's bureaucratic confidence. In reality, the evidence was still being compiled, but the suggestion that it had already been disseminated forced Hancock to Recalculate his strategy. Sir, one of the federal agents said quietly, we're receiving reports that this situation is attracting external attention. Social media activity suggests the story is beginning to spread beyond military channels. Hancock's expression shifted from triumph to concern as he realized that his carefully controlled narrative was fragmenting. The same technology that had allowed him to fabricate evidence was now being used to expose the truth faster than he could suppress it. Gentlemen, Mitchell said, addressing the federal agents directly, I suggest you take a very careful look at the evidence before you commit to supporting Colonel Hancock's version of events. Because in about 12 hours, this is all going to be front-page news, and you'll want to make sure you're on the right side of history. The revelation phase was reaching its climax, but the outcome remained uncertain. Truth was finally emerging, but power structures designed to suppress inconvenient facts were fighting back with everything they had. The story broke at 0600 hours, carried simultaneously across military social media networks, veteran forums, and mainstream news outlets that had been monitoring military communications. What started as whispered conversations in barracks and ready rooms exploded into national headlines that no amount of bureaucratic damage control could contain. Air Force hero framed after saving Rangers screamed across television screens from CNN to Fox News. The narrative that Hancock had worked so carefully to control was disintegrating in real time, replaced by a story that captured everything Americans wanted to believe about their military, that excellence and courage still mattered more than politics and bureaucracy. Sarah sat in her detention cell, unaware of the media firestorm building around her story, but she could sense something changing in the behavior of her guards. Conversations that had been formal and distant became respectful, almost apologetic. The military police who had initially treated her as a security threat now seemed uncertain about their orders. The shift began when Sergeant Jackson, the MP who had first questioned Hancock's accusations, received a phone call from his wife that changed everything. Honey, she said, her voice excited despite the early hour, you're all over the news. That pilot you were talking about last night, the one who saved those Rangers, she's being called the greatest A-10 pilot of her generation. People are saying she was framed 3 years ago for refusing to follow illegal orders. Jackson looked at the detention facility's monitors, where Sarah sat calmly reading a technical manual that someone had smuggled to her. The woman he'd been ordered to guard as a dangerous spy was being hailed as a national hero by people who understood military excellence better than bureaucrats in Washington. Ma'am, he said through the intercom, I think you should know that. Your story is getting attention from people who matter. Rangers are posting videos online talking about what you did last night. Pilots are coming forward with information about irregularities in Colonel Hancock's operations. Sarah looked up from her manual with the first smile she'd allowed herself in months. Sergeant, are you telling me that the truth is finally getting out? Ma'am, I'm telling you that the whole damn country is talking about an Air Force pilot who risked everything to save American soldiers. And people are asking some very pointed questions about why that pilot is sitting in a detention cell instead of getting a medal. The media attention was creating pressure that even the broken Aero protocol couldn't withstand indefinitely. Congressional offices were receiving thousands of calls demanding investigation into Sarah's treatment. Veteran organizations were mobilizing their members to protest outside military installations. Social media campaigns with hashtags like #FreeReaper and #Heroes Don't Belong in Jail were trending nationally. But the most devastating blow to Hancock's narrative came from an unexpected source, General Patricia Iron Eagle Sullivan, a 3-star general whose own combat record made her untouchable even by the corruption network that had destroyed Sarah's career. General Sullivan had been following the story through unofficial channels, and what she discovered made her furious. Enough to bypass normal military protocol entirely. She arranged a live television interview that would air during prime time, with the explicit intention of exposing the truth that bureaucrats had worked so hard to bury. "Let me be clear about something," General Sullivan said, looking directly into the camera with the authority of someone who had earned her rank through combat rather than politics. "The pilot being held under espionage charges is Captain Sarah Williams, Calcine Reaper, the most decorated A-10 pilot of her generation. She was framed 3 years ago for refusing to participate in weapons-dealing operations that violated both military law and international treaties." The television interview sent shockwaves through military and civilian leadership. A general with Sullivan's reputation and influence had just publicly accused senior military officials of framing a hero to cover up their own crimes. The story was no longer containable through normal damage control procedures. Within hours of Sullivan's interview, additional evidence began surfacing from sources that had been silent for years. Pilots who had witnessed Hancock's illegal activities but feared retaliation suddenly found the courage to speak publicly. Intelligence analysts provided documentation of weapons shipments that had been disguised as legitimate military operations. Even some of Hancock's own subordinates began cooperating with investigators rather than face prosecution as accomplices. The digital evidence that Rodriguez and Chun had compiled was leaked simultaneously to multiple news organizations, creating a comprehensive picture of corruption that reached far beyond one rogue colonel. Financial records, communication logs, and photographic evidence painted a detailed portrait of military resources being systematically exploited for personal profit. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, who had been relieved of command and placed under investigation, was suddenly reinstated as investigators realized that his actions had been those of a whistleblower rather than a security threat. His first act upon returning to duty was to personally unlock Sarah's detention cell. "Captain Williams," he said formally as the cell door swung open, "on behalf of the United States Air Force, I apologize for the injustices you have endured. Your actions last night saved American lives, and your patience over the past 3 years has helped expose corruption that threatened the integrity of our entire service." Sarah stood slowly, still processing the magnitude of what had changed in less than 24 hours. "Sir, does this mean I'm no longer facing espionage charges?" "Captain, you're no longer facing any charges. In fact, there are some people who would very much like to discuss your future with the Air Force, assuming you're interested in returning to active flight status." But Sarah's attention was focused on something else entirely, a folder that Mitchell carried, marked with classification levels she hadn't seen in 3 years. "Sir, what's in the folder?" Mitchell's expression shifted from apologetic to grimly satisfied. "Evidence that Project Clean Slate has been operating for over a decade, systematically eliminating military personnel whose competence threatened established power structures. We've identified 47 cases of heroes who were framed, transferred, or forced out of service to protect the careers of their superiors." Sarah felt the true scope of the conspiracy settling into her understanding. She hadn't been an isolated victim. She'd been one target in a systematic campaign to ensure that excellence remained subordinate to political convenience. "Captain, we've also discovered something else that might interest you. The weapons dealing operation that led to your original frame-up is still active. Colonel Hancock was just one node in a network that extends to defense contractors, Pentagon officials, and international arms dealers." Sarah looked at the evidence with growing comprehension. Her personal battle for vindication had revealed something much larger, a cancer within the military establishment that had been metastasizing for years, protected by the same bureaucratic procedures that had nearly destroyed her. "Sir, what happens next?" Mitchell's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had finally found a worthy mission. "Next, Captain, we build something that Hancock and his network never anticipated. We build a coalition of the people they tried to eliminate, the pilots, tacticians, engineers, and commanders whose only crime was being better at their jobs than their superiors wanted them to be. Over the following weeks, as congressional hearings exposed the full extent of Project Clean Slate and related corruption, Sarah found herself at the center of something unprecedented in military history. Veterans who had been forced into early retirement began coming forward with evidence of systematic persecution. Active duty personnel who had been sidelined for asking inconvenient questions suddenly found their voices. The network that had been designed to eliminate excellence began transforming into a coalition dedicated to protecting it. Sarah's story became a rallying cry for military personnel who refused to accept that competence should be subordinate to politics. Captain Rodriguez, now serving as Sarah's unofficial campaign manager for what was becoming a movement rather than just a legal case, showed her the latest numbers from their support network. "Sarah, we've got confirmed support from personnel at 43 different military installations. Pilots, mechanics, analysts, commanders, people who were told their careers were over for asking the wrong questions or performing too well. They're organizing, sharing information, and demanding accountability from leadership that thought it could bury inconvenient truths." Sarah studied the roster of names, recognizing some from her own career and learning about others whose stories paralleled her own experiences. "Marcus, this isn't just about fixing my situation anymore, is it? No, it's not. This is about fundamentally changing how the military handles excellence and innovation. It's about making sure that the next generation of warriors doesn't have to choose between doing their jobs well and keeping their careers intact." The final validation came 6 months later, when Sarah was not only reinstated to active duty, but promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of an experimental, close air support squadron. Her mission: develop new tactics and technologies that would revolutionize battlefield aviation, with explicit protection from bureaucratic interference. But perhaps more importantly, she was also appointed to head the Military Excellence Protection Board, an independent organization dedicated to identifying and supporting military personnel whose competence made them targets for bureaucratic elimination. Standing in the hangar where her resurrection had begun, Sarah looked at the A-10 that had carried her back to purpose and recognition. The aircraft bore new markings now, not just her personal Reaper insignia, but symbols representing each of the 47 officers who had been systematically eliminated by Project Clean Slate. "You know what's funny about trying to bury people alive?" she said to Rodriguez, who had become her second in command in the new squadron. "Sometimes they don't just survive, they multiply." The network that had been designed to eliminate threats to mediocrity had instead created a coalition of excellence that was transforming military culture from within. Young pilots joined squadrons where innovation was rewarded rather than punished. Mechanics developed improvements without fear that their suggestions would threaten superior officers. Analysts provided honest assessments without worrying that accuracy might end their careers. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from the Pentagon. "Colonel Williams, we have a situation in Syria that requires someone with your specific expertise. Are you available for immediate deployment?" She looked at the message, then at the A-10 that had become her partner in resurrection, and finally at the squadron of pilots who had joined her mission to protect military excellence from bureaucratic assassination. "Marcus, looks like we've got work to do." "What kind of work?" Sarah's smile carried the confidence of someone who had been buried alive and chosen to use the experience as fertilizer for growth rather than poison for revenge. The kind that reminds everyone why excellence matters more than politics, why competence trumps bureaucracy, and why some people refuse to stay buried no matter how deep you dig their graves. As her A-10 lifted off for another mission, Sarah reflected on the journey from maintenance hangar to squadron command. The system that had tried to destroy her had instead created something far more dangerous to corruption and mediocrity. A network of warriors who understood that the greatest threat to incompetent leadership was competent subordinates who refused to accept limitations, The Rangers had been saved. The truth had been revealed. The network had risen. And somewhere in secure facilities around the world, bureaucrats who thought they could bury inconvenient heroes were learning that some people don't just rise from ashes. They bring the fire that burns away everything false, leaving only what is strong enough to survive the heat of truth. Reaper was airborne again, and this time, she wasn't flying alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.